1 bar of 4/4. All jazz players use the bebop scale. Getting into the jazz sound, it's crucial that you get into the bebop scale and you find out how this one works. It's not a magic trick, it's simple practice. I'll get right into it. The most common bebop scale, and what people mostly refer to as the bebop scale, is the 8-note scale played on the dominant. This G7 dominant, the bebop scale, is a Mixolydian dominant scale, added a half note between the 7th and the root. By adding a chromatic step between the 7th and root, you get a scale that exactly fits and thus comes out on the next bar on the 1 with the same note as where you began. When you begin and end on a beat playing the bebop scale, you always come out on a chord note. This is a really strong way of outlining the chord-scale relationship and the function of the chord. All these principles also apply when you play the bebop scale up. With this in mind, it's very easy to see all the advantages there is to using the bebop scale on a dominant. When we begin our musical line on a dominant chord, on a chord note, playing the bebop scale down from any chord note, we end on the same chord note 1 bar later. And when you play the bebop scale in a shorter run, you get the same effect. But you get a more flexible setup because you have shorter lines which you have to fit. On my Patreon, I've added all the length of the bebop scale in all 12 keys. This makes it easy to copy and paste into your jazz soloing. Visit the Patreon and get the material on the first tier. I would always advise you to practice the bebop scale musically. Please do not just jump in and play the scales up and down, blindly with no direction. When I'm practicing, I use 3 basic guidelines. Play musically, play in context, and play in a musical setting. Played musically would mean for me that how would this line sound if I add this directly into a tune. Play with great tone, great articulation and good direction. Play in a context. Always think about where you can place your lines, where you can place the material you're practicing. For example, here the G bebop scale. I can use this on a G7 chord. So I'm thinking 2, 5, 1 in C, there's a G7. I'm going to add this line directly on that G7. Thinking that all the time when I'm playing the line, I'm thinking the 5 of C is G. I add the bebop scale there. Remember to play it in a musical setting. Here it's a blues, it's a simple blues where there's dominant chords on all the functions, bebop scales on all the bars. Immediately add the material you are playing and you are practicing into a musical setting where you can use it. Add the material to songs you are playing. All these different ways and a lot more ways of practicing the bebop scale are of course on my Patreon in the lesson description PDF. The most challenging part is probably putting the bebop scale to use. In this example, I've added the bebop scale from the root to the 3rd on all the chords. On the A minor, I've changed the bebop scale to a D7 bebop scale. I like the build-up in learning the bebop scale, so do not expect to become an expert just because you know the bebop scale going up or going down in the most simple way. The fitting to tunes need a lot of attention and a lot of practice. How I would begin practicing this is adding this slowly to the form in very small bits. As I mentioned before, the chords of this blues are only dominant chords, which gives an opportunity to add bebop scales of different lengths on each chord. Further, I stay within the bar, so I don't get trouble by changing the bebop scale halfway. As you see how the bebop scale fits the dominant chord. Every interval of the dominant chord bits a part of the bebop scale. To get into this way of thinking, that you're actually thinking the chord with the scale, I've added the bebop scale from the root to the third, descending. You can constantly think on the chord you're playing and the scale in this exercise. The great part is, as long as you do not cross the bar line, you can keep playing the bebop scale up, down, smaller or longer bits. Start on the beat, end on the beat, and you'll always have a chord note. I really advise you to go through all these options and add bebop scales to the tune that you are playing. If you do this, it's quite a short way from starting on the bebop scale to actually use it in your playing. Keep going at it till you nail all the small beats of the bebop scale, and you'll be able to use the bebop scale freely on any dominant chord. In the Patreon lessons full lesson transcription PDF, I have added all the small bits of the bebop scale which you can practice. Together with the earlier mentioned scale exercises, I've also added different melodic blues licks and melodic blues forms where I've added the bebop scale using this concept. And of course, everything is transposed to all 12 keys, and all the lesson examples are in the Alto key. Find it on Patreon on the first tier. Who is your biggest bebop hero? And what's your favorite bebop lick? Let me know in the comments below. Your support on Patreon makes me able to put out these videos every week. Check out the Patreon and you get all the good stuff. Any questions? You know where to put them down in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Find all the links of this video in the description below. Play music and have fun.